Welcome back, friends, to another episode of the Rigor Mortis podcast. My name is Adam.
I am Jason.
And together, we are going to do Elizabeth Smart.
Yes. I remember this case. You brought this one this week.
Yeah, no, and it's kind of funny because, well, not funny, but I was watching the news, I think maybe half an hour after it suggested, hey, let's do this case, and she's back in the news. And it was just kind of a weird thing, Totally different, unrelated thing, but...
It's kind of unrelated. I mean, it's unrelated to what we're going to cover, but it's really involved in her entire story, really. And this is a woman who's been through a lot in her life. And, I remember, I think I was around 14 when this happened, and something about it was just terrifying.
Yeah, and I got to give a big shout out to her anyways, because she's definitely a strong person.
She has picked up her life and made the most of it, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the best place to start with this story, it's like most stories that we cover, probably in the beginning.
Yeah, Elizabeth was born on November 3rd, 1987 in Salt Lake City, Utah. Her father, Edward Smart, and her mother, Lois Smart. She was raised in a family that was part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is Mormons, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And she actually has 4 brothers and 1 sister. She's the second oldest child in her family. She went to middle school at Bryant Middle School and East High School.
And she later on attended Brigham Young University, which is a...
BYU. It's Mormon college, essentially.
Another Mormon school, yeah.
Pretty much everybody, I think, in Salt Lake City is a Mormon, so it wasn't like she was out of place or anything like that, but...
While she was there, she earned a bachelor's degree in music, and she was known to be one heck of a harp player.
It's a very interesting instrument.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think that I know anybody who's ever played the harp, but good for her. Now, this story really takes off on June 5th of 2002.
Yes. Now, Smart was only 14 years old at the time when she was abducted at knife point from her bedroom in her family's house in Salt Lake City, Utah. Could you imagine?
That's what was so terrifying to me is I think when when this all happened, I was
the same age.
Yeah, I was 14 too. Yeah, so there was just something so scary about the vulnerability of somebody can take you from your own bed in the middle of the night. It's like,
yeah, and as a teenager, 14, 15 years old, you think you're invincible. You don't think somebody could potentially break into our house. What are the precautions we got to take to protect ourselves? It must have been just like any other night for her, where she went to bed. She was just going to rise the next morning and go to school or carry on with her life, whatever she was going to do. But something happened that night,
Right. I remember, too, one of those first times where you're like, maybe I should check my windows and doors are locked at nighttime. It's just something about it was really scary, but her nightmare really all begins in the early hours of June 5th of 2002 when a man broke into her home in Federal Heights neighborhood of Salt Lake City, where she lived with her her five siblings and her parents. Now, this man abducted Elizabeth from the bedroom she shared with her 9-year-old sister, Mary Catherine, who was actually awakened, but she pretended to be asleep during this abduction.
She must have just been terrified and just was playing possum, so to speak, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you wake up in the middle of the night and there's probably a random person you don't recognize in your room, and part of you's got to be wondering if you're next. I mean, part of you's got to be thinking, what's going on? Maybe I should, get a description or things like that. And
she was smart enough to do that.
Yeah,
because she was able to report that what she had saw was what appeared to be a white man about the height of her brother, Charles, which is about 5'8", about 30 or 40 years old. Again, this is coming from a child, though, so you got to keep that in mind,
right,
too. Wearing lightly colored clothes and a golf hat.
Yeah, he was actually wearing black, and did not have a golf hat, and he was 48 years old. So she was not completely accurate, but even just conveying what she did see did help quite a bit. And she also said that he had dark hair, and also dark hair on his arms and on the backs of his hands. And she said that she heard the man threaten Elizabeth with a knife, which she actually thought was a gun at the time.
It was dark, you know what I mean? She's terrified. She That's where these discrepancies would come from, I'd imagine.
Of course, and like you said, she was 9 years old. So she also noted that when Elizabeth was being let out of the room, she said, "Ouch," and she actually had stubbed her toe on a chair. And the man said something like, "You better be quiet, and I won't hurt you."
She heard Elizabeth ask, "Why are you doing this?" and thought the answer was not clear. Mary Catherine thought the answer might have been for ransom.
So this is a few years after, JonBenet Ramsey. So, we don't hear too many ransoms these days, I guess. But
No.
but it was kind of a thing around that time, I guess. But she did note that the man that had taken Elizabeth was very soft-spoken, even polite to a degree, and also noted that he was very, very calm throughout the entire situation.
And this is probably a tactic he used to keep the situation under control.
Right. And you don't want to have chaos, or chaos breeds more chaos. So this man actually spoke to Elizabeth pretty quietly, and Mary Catherine thought that his voice seemed somehow familiar, but she couldn't pinpoint where or when she had heard it, and she never did get a look at the man's face, but that was actually kept secret by police throughout their investigation, according to CNN. So that's pretty common. We see that with a lot of cases where the police will withhold certain information that they want for the investigation.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to say right off the bat that...
We have no idea what the guy looks like.
We have no clue. We have no clue at all what this guy looks like. No, you want to keep him on his toes, keep him guessing. And that's kind of what they were doing here. For sure,
Now, Mary Catherine actually remained calm throughout this entire thing. And then when she thought that Elizabeth and the abductor had been gone, she actually attempts to go to her parents' bedroom, and actually was only narrowly avoided being seen by the kidnapper himself.
Wow, that's crazy. So this guy was just tiptoeing around.
Yeah, she said that they were outside the bedroom of the boys in the family. So she ended up creeping back into her bed at the time, where she hid for an undetermined amount of time, but possibly up to 2 hours, according to...
It must have seemed like a lifetime to her, though.
Right.
You know what I mean? It must have just been like... She must have felt like she was hiding forever.
I mean, yeah, and you got to think, too, is like... 2 hours is a long time for them to get away, or you can be a long way away from the area this crime happened in 2 hours.
Yeah. According to the Deseret News, just before 4 a.m., Mary Catherine woke her parents and told them what had happened. Thinking she had been dreaming, they didn't believe her, of course, because why would this be going on? Why would this happen? They soon realized that this horrendous story was not a dream, but was actual fact, when they had noticed that a screen window had been cut by a knife and Elizabeth was missing.
Yeah, it's actually crazy. When I was a kid, I lived in a first floor apartment. My dad had ran to the corner store real quick. I was actually at my mom's for the weekend, but when he came back, there was actually a perfect square cut out in the kitchen window screen.
Of your place?
Somebody was trying to break in while my dad ran to the store, but he was gone quickly. So when he came back, he actually saw the guy run off, and there was a perfect square cut in the screen. It's terrifying.
It is scary.
It is, definitely is. So, of course, her parents, leap into action, get a hold of authorities and things like that. And on June 6th of 2002, Ed and Louise went on television and pleaded for the kidnapper to return their daughter. I believe they went on CNN to do that.
Yes, and other news stations.
Yeah.
A massive regional search effort organized by the Laura Recovery Center involved up to 2,000 volunteers each day, as well as dogs and planes. Various websites carried flyers that could be printed or circulated via the internet. Gotta love the internet for stuff like that.
No, absolutely. And this was the early
internet days.
Relatively early.
Yeah, 2002. I mean, it's not what it is today.
Right.
After many days of intense searching, the community-led search was ended and efforts were directed to other means of finding Elizabeth, meaning I think it kind of went from a recovery to looking for a body kind of thing. Hopes diminished.
Oh, of course. And, during this time, according to the Sun-Herald, the police kind of note that the observations of her sister, Mary Catherine, were of little use, and there was little usable evidence in general that was found at the crime scene, such as fingerprints or DNA. So they end up using bloodhounds and things like that, but of course that was unsuccessful as well. And they begin, the process of interviewing hundreds and hundreds of potential suspects, including a 26-year-old actually who was cleared after being located in a West Virginia hospital. I'm not sure exactly what they were looking at him for, but
It's quite a ways away, too.
yeah, absolutely.
Had days to run.
This entire investigation had the side effect of returning several at-large criminals to prison, but she wasn't found. So, of course, I'm sure the police start looking at local sex offenders, local criminals with, home invasions and robberies and things like that, just trying to narrow the list down.
Now, according to Haberman and McIntosh, Salt Lake City police considered Richard Reiki a person of interest early in the investigation. So they were able to locate somebody that they thought might have had something to do with this. Reiki was a handyman with a history of drug abuse who had worked for the Smarts, so kind of knew the house. Might have known where, the kids were residing in, what rooms, right? So when you have nothing to look at, you're going to pluck at straws.
Right. And he had actually been jailed on an unrelated parole violation prior to this. It's actually crazy because when all this was happening, I remember hearing in the news that they believed that it was somebody who had maybe worked on the home or done yard work around the home or something like that. It seemed to me, from what I remember hearing, was that the Smarts frequently hired people to do landscaping and yard work around their home.
Now, Reiki ends up dying of a brain hemorrhage in August of 2002. What I got to say is, not that I've ever thought about abducting anybody, but if you're going to abduct someone, why would you break into a house where there's a mother, a father, and 6 children? It just seems like your chances of getting caught in the act are increased by the number of people that are inhabiting the dwelling.
Right.
That's just nuts. And the fact that nobody got up, of course you have her terrified sister, but you would have thought that somebody else might have woken up. That would have been, you think that would be enough for anybody to say, not this house?
Yeah, I would agree. There's just so many people that could catch you in the act. Maybe he wasn't worried about that. Maybe he had been in the house before. Who knows? But, of course, while all this searching and whatnot is going on, her family's trying to keep her name in the press. They actually create a website about the abduction and things like that. But for Elizabeth, after her kidnapping, she gets taken into the woods to an encampment outside of Salt Lake City where she was met by a woman named Wanda Barzee. And she's actually with her kidnapper, who is identified now, not at the time, it wasn't known, but his name is Mitchell.
Brian Mitchell.
Yes.
Now, in my opinion, this is where things get even weirder because Elizabeth is instructed to wash her feet and is told to change out of her pajamas into a robe type of garment. Now, she had refused, and Wanda had said, if you do not do this, I'm going to have Brian come and rip your clothes off.
That's got to be terrifying for a 14-year-old, and it really only gets weirder from there because Brian actually comes in and performs a ceremony, which I guess was to convey that he was marrying Elizabeth, which is messed up. He obviously has a very, very twisted, demented mind to think that that's okay. But then it gets worse as he actually proceeds to rape her after the ceremony.
Now, Mitchell claimed to be an angel, and he also told Smart that he was a Davidic king who would emerge in 7 years, be stoned by a mob, lie dead in the streets for 3 days, and then rise up and kill the Antichrist.
This guy has got some visions in his head, I guess. But Elizabeth says that Mitchell said that she was the first of many virgin brides that he planned to kidnap, each of whom would accompany him as he battled the Antichrist. So it's going to be Mitchell and all of his virgin brides that is going to take out the Antichrist.
It's like forming an army is what he's thinking in his mind of virgins.
It's got to be absolutely terrifying for her to be in the captivity of this guy who is saying a bunch of things that doesn't make sense. Of course, being physically and sexually abusive towards her, mentally abusive towards her, and it's just crazy. And to keep her from escaping, she actually gets shackled to a tree with a metal cable, which allowed her pretty limited mobility outside of the tent that she occupied.
During her captivity, she was forced to take a new name, and she chose the name Esther after Esther of the Old Testament. So, biblical.
Wow. It was later revealed during court testimony that Brian Mitchell repeatedly raped Smart throughout the time, sometimes multiple times a day, and forced her to look at pornographic magazines and regularly threatened to kill her.
He often forced her to drink alcohol and take drugs to lower her resistance, and both starved her and fed her garbage. Smart's abuse was facilitated by the absence of Barzee, who Smart would later refer to as the most evil woman she had ever met.
And that's saying a lot considering what Brian's doing to her, to say that this woman is absolutely horrible. What's so crazy to me about this entire thing is that while she's being kept captive, they're still taking her in public sometimes.
Yeah, actually, it sounds like on numerous occasions. This was a regular thing.
Yeah, she actually accompanies Brian and Wanda in public on numerous occasions, but her presence was either obscured or unnoticed due to various methods of concealment they would do. Usually she was wearing like a headscarf and face veil, so they were able to conceal her, but it's unfortunate that she wasn't able to just be like, I'm Elizabeth Smart, and like somebody would rescue her.
I wonder how many times she thought about doing that.
Oh,
trying to just say something or reach out to somebody to just help me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Scary shit, In August of 2002, around 2 months after Smart's kidnapping, Mitchell devised a plan to leave Salt Lake City with Wanda and Smart, possibly to Boston or New York. So they're thinking they're going to head east.
Yeah, and they're probably thinking that getting into a big city, they'll kind of blend in a little bit more. And, knowing how Brian is, he's probably trying to convey his message to a larger audience, I guess. So they start researching potential places to relocate, and they end up visiting the Salt Lake Public Library with Elizabeth. While they're there, they're noticed by a library patron due to their unusual styles of dress, as they each wore full-length robes and veils that concealed most of their faces. Now, this patron was convinced to call police after looking closely at Smart's eyes. You ever have that where you make eye contact with somebody and you feel like they're trying to tell you something with the way they're looking at you?
Or something's off.
Right, and that's probably what they were doing.
Yeah, I would say so. Something told this person at the library that you need to notify the authorities, something internally.
And this is absolutely insane. So after she calls police, the police actually, a detective arrives, and he confronts Brian and Wanda and Elizabeth, but he wasn't actually, he was actually deterred by Brian Mitchell, who actually just said that Elizabeth was his daughter named Augustine Marshall, and they were unable to remove their veils or garb on religious grounds.
Interesting.
She's literally feet from a cop, and this is 2 months after her abduction, and they can't get her because of a religious reason.
Even the 2 months of abuse that she must have gone through, she was terrified. She probably thought in her mind, even if she said something, she wouldn't be rescued, and things would get worse for her from there, is what I think.
Yeah, what did they call that when the captor starts
brainwashing?
No, there's a specific term for it. Stockholm Syndrome is what it is. And it seems like that's kind of what's happening, where she wants to say something, but she may be believing the things Brian's telling her by this point.
Maybe, I know with the repeated abuse, the mind doesn't work correctly.
Right. Later on, Elizabeth would actually say that Wanda had signaled her not to move, and he gripped her legs under the table. She says about the incident that, I felt like hope was walking out the door. I was mad at myself that I didn't say anything, mad at myself for not taking the chance. So close. I felt terrible the detective hadn't pushed harder. He had just walked away. That's so sad.
Smart also visited grocery stores and a restaurant, but went unnoticed. I mean, very easy to blend in, especially when you're in full gown, I guess.
Right. And according to the Deseret News, Elizabeth actually visited grocery stores and a restaurant with them and went unnoticed again. And in the fall of 2002, she actually attended a party with Brian and Wanda and was photographed wearing a veil and robe with them as just another party guest, basically.
Now, in September of 2002, Mitchell and Wanda left Salt Lake City with Smart and relocated to San Diego County in California. So instead of making a move east, they just go further west.
Right.
Where they held Smart in an encampment in a dry creek bed in Lakeside, California.
Wow.
Yeah. Brian and Wanda did relocate with Smart to several different encampments in San Diego County, often being on the move in the middle of the night to avoid being caught.
It's interesting that that's the way things work, I guess, because, of course, moving in the middle of the night, you're not going to be seen by as many civilians and things like that. But, I work night shift, and I can tell you, I have, a 5-minute drive home on my lunch break, and I see, 20 cops. I would be so paranoid having a kidnapped person in my car or whatever, driving at nighttime, where the only other people you're seeing probably is police officers.
You would think that moving during the day in this kind of situation would be easier, like
Yeah,
you're
you
saying.
just blend in.
Hiding in plain sight.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, on February 12th of 2003, Brian was arrested in El Cajun for breaking into a church and actually spent several days in jail over the incident.
Now, in October of 2002, Smart's sister, Mary Catherine, suddenly realized that the abductor's voice was that of an unemployed man the family knew as Emmanuel.
This makes perfect sense to me for multiple reasons. One, Mary Catherine's probably been replaying this in her head since the minute that it happened.
Thousands of times.
Thousands of times. And also, the name Emmanuel sticks out to me because this is a very religious man, and that's a name from the Bible.
Sure, yeah, makes sense.
Now, the family had actually hired him for a day to work on the roof and rake leaves. So he probably had a little bit of conversation with the children. They were probably like, "Oh, what are you doing?" Blah, blah, blah. And she just happened to recognize his voice. So, of course, coming from a 9-year-old, the police were a little skeptical because of the short time that this man had worked for the family. They thought he might have said something to her, but probably not enough where she would just recognize his voice.
Though reluctant, the family had a sketch artist draw a sketch of the man's face based off of the descriptions of Mary Catherine.
Right. And this photograph or drawing gets shown on Larry King Live, America's Most Wanted, and local news stations and things like that. And the drawing actually gets recognized by relatives of Brian Mitchell, who give police newer photographs of him.
And with that, on March 12th of 2003, Mitchell was spotted with a woman and a girl in Sandy, Utah. So they're heading back towards their home state.
Yeah.
By a couple who had seen photographs of Brian on the news. The woman was Wanda, and the girl was Elizabeth Smart, disguised in a gray wig for sure. Somebody had found them.
Yep, and Smart gets recognized by the police officers during question. And at that time, Brian and Wanda are arrested 9 months after the kidnapping of Elizabeth.
1 month after the recovery of Elizabeth Smart, the state of Utah supersedes the then existing Rachel Alert. Now, what is this?
The Rachel Alert, I believe it's like Utah's version of an Amber Alert.
It's more of a statewide thing over a national thing?
Yeah, I think that Amber Alert has much more stringent criteria where you get a lot more information from it. And after this case, Utah actually did go to the Amber Alert system.
Right. I mean, this is Utah's not a very populated state. These kind of crazy cases don't really take place there. So up until this point, they probably didn't feel a need to have this national, be part of this national database type thing. But definitely a smart move into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, once they're arrested, Brian and Wanda go through the court process, and at first the court requested that Brian undergo a competency evaluation based on his claims of being a religious prophet.
So thinking he's nuts right off the bat. I mean, of course he is. I mean,
it seems like a fair assumption.
Full-blown whack-a-loon.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, while awaiting the evaluation, Brian was incarcerated at the Utah State Hospital instead of the prison, and a psychologist hired by the defense distinguished between zealous belief and delusion and concluded that Brian's beliefs transcended zeal and were in fact delusional. So
he's nuts.
Yeah, it was in his opinion that Mitchell was not competent to stand trial as a result of his delusions.
Man, I hate that.
Me
I
too.
hate that. You know what?
Just because you're fucking batshit crazy, you get you're not responsible for the crimes you committed. That's not fair.
And this is what pisses me off about stuff like this, right? From the time that he had that the thought went into his mind that I'm going to go into this house and abduct this child, right? He had enough intelligence to piece this together, not only to completely do this, but to break into a house where there's 8 people living and pull it off.
Right.
You know what I mean? He's not that crazy. Not like somebody that would be a complete lunatic that would just probably barge into a house like a maniac,
right,
grab somebody, making all kinds of noise, and run off with them.
Right.
He knew what he was doing, is what I'm saying, and he had it all planned out.
Right, and luckily the court saw it that way as well, because they basically overrode the psychologist's opinion and did find Brian to be competent to stand trial. in 2004. Of course, at this time, plea negotiations come about, and between the defense and the prosecution, and the defendant was actually willing to plead guilty to kidnapping and burglaring for a 10 to 15 year sentence on the condition that Smart would not testify. The prosecution refused to drop sexual assault charges against Mitchell, so no agreement was reached.
Good.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a good prosecuting attorney. They've got enough evidence against this guy. They're not going to let him off with 10 to 15 years and really, essentially, forgive him for the more serious of his crimes.
Oh yeah, you get enough to nail his ass down. Just run with it. Right. Just run with it. Absolutely. You know, you get all this evidence. You've got everything. There's nothing to prove his innocence whatsoever. Everything is there to prove his guilt.
Absolutely. And on October 15th of 2004, plea negotiations had still not determined an agreement, and the defense appealed as late as October 21st, asking the prosecution to rethink their position in terms of what they're offering Mitchell. I don't think the defense is in a position to be begging for anything here.
No.
Not at all. And up to this point, the defense didn't highlight the breakdown in his competency as, an issue of the plea agreement. So I think his lawyers are basically like, we got half the people saying that he's too crazy to stand trial and half the people saying he's not. So let's just meet in the middle somewhere. And they're like, no, that's not going to happen.
There's just no need.
Right.
There's just no need. So the appeal was subsequently rejected.
Yeah, and they end up taking another psychologist to come in and give him another evaluation.
And Brian is once again interviewed by the request of his defense team in February of 2005. After this interview, his attorney filed a brief statement stating that Brian was no longer competent to stand trial.
Yeah, and then he starts acting batshit crazy in court, and jail staff observed no change in his behavior and basically just thought that he was putting on a show in the courtroom, from what it sounds like.
Common.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ultimately, the judge agreed with the defense, asserting that Brian's behavior reflects psychosis. So now they're starting to get the judge to even believe that he's crazy, even though there are professionals and prison workers that are saying this guy's clearly putting on a show.
Right. So she sends him back to the Utah State Hospital on August 11th of 2005, and he actually remained there until 2008. And while he was in the hospital, no staff experienced him being paranoid in any sense. So it sounds like he was really just putting on a show to go to the mental hospital, maybe have it a little cushier than he would in jail.
And the sad thing about all this is, while this is going on, nobody's really thinking about Elizabeth Smart or her family, because these couple of years are going by here and they're not getting any kind of closure. And when this kind of trauma happens to a person, especially a young woman, she's probably living in fear. What if he gets out? What if he tries to do this again?
Yeah,
she's
absolutely.
living in terror. It's incredible the total rebound that she ends up making in life.
Right. And of course he is crazy, so to speak, and he's refusing to take any medication while he's in the state hospital. So in February of 2006, they actually issue a bill to go before the Utah legislature to allow for prosecutors to forcibly medicate defendants that were found incompetent, to hopefully restore their competency for trial.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Now, permission to forcibly medicate Wanda was also sought, relying upon the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Sell versus United States, which is something that I had read about, previously before recording this.
Yeah, and they just kind of go back and forth about his competency. And then on December 12th of 2008, it was reported that Brian Mitchell could not legally be forcibly medicated by the state of Utah to restore his mental competency, and also claiming that it was unnecessary and needlessly harsh. Yeah, well, so is kidnapping and raping somebody.
I was just going to say that, I feel like when you kidnap somebody, you rape them, you torture them, you put them in fear for their life, I feel like you kind of forfeited some of your personal rights and privileges at that point.
I don't give a shit how uncomfortable you are after you did something like that. You deserve every bit of it.
There's no consideration for Elizabeth Smart's rights as a human being during her captivity with these people.
Right.
But that's just how things work. But once again, this was considered unnecessary and needlessly harsh, and therefore a violation of the Utah State Constitution to prolong trial proceedings to this length.
Yeah, and it keeps going back and forth, going to the Supreme Court and whatnot. But Mitchell was eventually found to be mentally ill per the defense, but he was deemed competent to stand trial on March 1st of 2010. So eventually they get to the court cases here, and Wanda actually pled guilty and was sentenced to concurrent terms of 15 years in state and federal prison. However, due to the delays in mental evaluations, it actually took Brian's case almost 8 years to come to court from the time Elizabeth was found.
Why is it Brian and Wanda were handled differently in this? Was it because Brian was the one that broke into the house and abducted her? I mean, Wanda was definitely a participant in all of this.
To me, I don't know if this is true or not, but to me, my opinion is Brian was crazy and probably the mastermind of this, and Wanda was just evil and wanted to be a part of it. That's
right.
I think she was more evil than crazy.
Brian's trial began on November 8th of 2010. The defense acknowledged that Brian was in fact responsible for the crime, but contended that he was legally insane. So they're sticking with the insanity thing here at the time of the crime, and should therefore be found not guilty by reason of insanity. The insanity defense for Brian was rejected on December 11th of 2010 when the jury found him guilty of kidnapping and transporting a minor across state lines with intent to engage in sexual activity. That's a nice way of putting it, I guess.
Yeah.
U.S. District Judge Dale Kimball sentenced Brian to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Very much deserved.
Yeah.
Every last bit of it.
Brian is currently serving his life sentence at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, a high-security federal prison in Indiana.
And what's one thing we know about prisons? They don't like sex offenders.
They don't like sex offenders, no. They don't like sex offenders, and I'm hoping he has a real miserable life there.
Right. Now, in 2016, Wanda's federal imprisonment was terminated, and she was transferred from the Federal Medical Center in Fort Worth, Texas, to the Utah State Prison to begin serving her state prison sentence. She was released in September of 2018, which Elizabeth, of course, then protested, which rightfully so. So, what has Elizabeth been up to since all of this has been done?
Well, one thing that is encouraging is that instead of letting this destroy her life and destroy her as a human being, she's been able to take this negative event and use it, to help other victims of abuse.
Yeah, she, she's going to live with this every day. It's going to be on her mind. It's going to be a very serious part of her life going forward. But she did what many Mormons do. She went on missionary trips, including one to France, which she ended up coming back for during the trial. She took a break from it, and then after the trial, she went back to finish her missionary trip. And actually went to Paris for a mission, and while she was there, she met Scotland native Matthew Gilmore in January of 2012. They dated for about a year, and then they became engaged.
They married on February 18th of 2012 in a private ceremony in Hawaii.
Oh, that must have been beautiful.
Yeah, they went on to have 3 children, which is great, because a lot of times women that have undergone sexual abuse, especially something as traumatic as this, they have no trust in men at all. So
rightfully so.
Rightfully so, of course, but it's just great that she was able to move on with her life, get married, have 3 children, and be a productive, happy person.
She's, of course, doing advocacy work and things like that throughout these times. And like you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, one thing that brought this to your attention is that she was in the news again recently.
Yeah. In 2019, while traveling home to Utah aboard a Delta Airlines flight, she woke up to find someone allegedly rubbing her between her legs and on her inner thighs. I mean, Jesus.
What a fucking creep.
I know, but again, just...
I wonder if he knew who she was. Not that it makes it any different, but, I wonder if he knew who she was, because she's not the type of girl who's going to stand for that.
No, not at all, but... you see a lot of these creepy guys that do stuff like that, even as I consider us to be regular guys. How many times do you even you're out in the community and you see guys just...
ogling or...
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot of... I was raised with respect to women.
Oh, yeah, me too, So, I don't behave this way, but you see a lot of other guys out in the community. You sit there and you watch them and you're like, man, what is wrong with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that work for you? Does that actually work for you? You go and you make these sexually harassing comments to women, and did you ever get a positive response from that, Right. I couldn't imagine.
No, just go use a cheesy pickup line. You don't need to go start rubbing her shoulders unprovoked.
Right, it's just... so hopefully her life there's no more sexual abuse in her future. I'm hoping things are.
Yeah, I wish her nothing but happiness.
Yeah.
She's been through a lifetime of trauma for sure. So, definitely glad that it worked out for a quote unquote happy ending. They found her alive.
Right. They found her alive.
Not always the case, as we know.
Very lucky that she was still alive. I mean,
Right.
how long? How long would she have been alive under their captivity, you think? I mean,
It's hard telling.
at some point, would they have gotten sick of her? Would they have, would they have killed her, you think, eventually? Would this have been like a toy box?
I don't
guy,
know if they would have killed her or if she would have died because they couldn't care for her. I mean, they're feeding her garbage and stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Now, were they feeding her garbage more because they couldn't take care of her, or was it just more to be abusive towards her?
Well, that's a good question because they clearly took her to restaurants. They took her in towns. It's not like they couldn't go do groceries or things like that. So
were they treating her as like a subhuman, that kind of thing?
Right.
Yeah.
Very break her down, I guess. So
very terrible.
Yeah. But let us know what you think. Thank you for joining us.
Shoot us an email at therigamortispodcast@gmail.com.
Also our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at the Rigor Mortis Podcast, and my personal Instagram. Rigor Mortis _JLEW.
You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Scullyfingers. Keep the comments coming. Keep the emails coming. And until next week, everybody, we'll see ya. Hey guys, we want to take a moment to tell you about this new exciting game that we've been playing called Best Fiends. Now, true crime is our passion, but even we need the occasional break. So when we need that mental palate cleanser, our go-to for a refresher is Best Fiends. Let me tell you what, I was super excited when they approached us in regards to sponsoring our podcast because I'd been playing Best Fiends for months.
Now, I've only been playing this for a few weeks since you told me about it, but I really enjoy how challenging the puzzles are, and it helps keep my brain fresh for all of the information we have to take in while recording the podcast.
This game is definitely challenging, Jason. You got that right. And a lot of fun to play. So engage your brain with fun puzzles and collect tons of cute characters. Trust me, with over 100 million downloads, this 5-star rated mobile puzzle game is a must play. So do yourself a favor like Jason and I have and download Best Fiends for free. It's a great game. We definitely think you'll enjoy. Again, check out Friends without the R. Best Fiends. Download it today.